The hall was full of soft whispers and the faint echo of shoes on the polished wooden floor. It was the evening of the annual music competition, the kind that drew talented people from all over the city. The audience was already seated, the judges in their places, and the bright stage lights made the piano in the center shine like a jewel. Everyone was excited, waiting to see who would rise above the rest this year. Among the crowd of contestants was a young woman named Lena. She wasn't dressed like the others in glittering gowns or shiny suits. She wore a plain white dress with sleeves rolled up to her elbows, her hair tied neatly at the back. There was something calm about her face, though her hands held a small tremor as she sat quietly near the backstage door, waiting for her turn. For months she had been preparing for this competition. Every night after work she would practice until her fingers hurt. The piece she had chosen was known for its difficulty, something only experienced pianists usually dared to play. But she loved it. She said once that the music felt alive, like it understood her heart better than words ever could. Her teacher had tried to talk her out of it. "It's too hard," he had said gently. "Choose something simpler, something safe." But Lena had just smiled. "If I fail, at least I'll fail with something I love." Now as she waited backstage, those words circled in her head. She could hear the muffled sound of the performer before her, a boy about her age playing with impressive speed but little feeling. The audience clapped politely when he finished. Then came the sound of the announcer's voice. "Next performer, Lena." She stood, took a deep breath, and walked toward the stage. Her shoes clicked softly against the wooden floor, and for a brief moment she felt the world shrink down to just her and the piano waiting in the spotlight. But then something unexpected happened. As she approached, one of the staff members rushed toward her, looking worried. "There's a small problem," he whispered. "The piano's tuning has slipped. One of the strings in the upper register isn't holding pitch." Lena froze. "Can it be fixed?" she asked. He shook his head. "Not before your turn. The tuner's already working on the backup instrument, but it'll take at least 30 minutes. She looked out into the audience. All eyes were on her. The judges were already waiting. Her name had been called. The staff member hesitated and said, "We can move you to the end of the lineup if you want." Lena thought for a moment. The old her, the one who used to doubt herself, would have said yes. But something in her heart refused to step back. She had spent too many years letting small obstacles stop her. Too many times she'd told herself she wasn't ready. Not this time. She smiled softly and said, "It's okay. I'll play." The man looked surprised but nodded. The hall fell silent as she walked to the piano. The instrument looked perfect from afar. Polished black surface, shining keys, but she knew that one string inside was not right. It might sound sharp, maybe flat. It could ruin the piece entirely. But as she sat down, the familiar feeling of the bench beneath her gave her comfort. She placed her fingers on the keys, and for a moment she just breathed. Her mother was in the audience, sitting in the very last row. She had saved money for months just to afford the ticket. When Lena caught her mother's eyes across the hall, something inside her settled. Her mother gave her a small nod, the kind that said, "You've faced worse than this," because she had. Years ago, when she was still in school, she didn't have a piano at all. She practiced on a second-hand keyboard that missed several notes and made a buzzing sound when plugged in. When it broke completely, she continued by drawing a set of keys on cardboard and practicing hand movements in silence. She learned to hear the notes in her head, to imagine the sound instead of needing it. It had been a hard childhood. No luxury, no expensive lessons, but her love for music kept her going. Now, facing this imperfect piano, she almost smiled. This was familiar. She had played broken instruments before. She had built herself on imperfection. When she pressed the first key, a faint wrong tone came out. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Some judges looked at each other, but she didn't stop. Her fingers moved slowly at first, feeling out the instrument, learning its mood. Every pianist knew that each piano had its own personality. Some were bright and sharp, others mellow and soft. This one was unpredictable. The second note she hit was clear, the third slightly off. So she adjusted, changing her dynamics, pressing harder or softer depending on what she heard. Within moments, the audience could sense something different happening. Instead of fighting the piano's flaws, she was dancing with them. Her body leaned into the rhythm. Her eyes closed. The melody began to take shape, not exactly how it was written, but with something raw and honest in it. The uneven notes became part of the story. People stopped whispering. Even the judges leaned forward. For the first few minutes, it wasn't perfect. It was brave. Halfway through the piece, the faulty string broke completely, making a sharp sound that echoed through the hall. A few people gasped, but Lena didn't flinch. She simply shifted her hand and continued, filling the missing note with her left-hand harmony. It wasn't what she had planned, but it worked. It sounded different, unique, emotional, alive. There was something in her expression, something almost peaceful. The audience could see it, that this wasn't just performance for her. This was her truth. Every mistake, every broken sound was something she had already lived through. By the time she reached the final section, her confidence had grown. The music swelled, her movement strong and fluid. The once awkward sound of the piano now felt intentional, almost poetic. It was as if she and the instrument were breathing together, one wounded, the other determined to heal it through sound. When she played the last note, she held it for just a moment longer than written, letting the tone fade naturally into silence. The hall stayed still. No one clapped at first. They were too stunned. Then slowly, one person began to applaud, followed by another until the whole hall erupted into sound. Lena sat there quietly, her hands resting on the keys, eyes glistening. She didn't smile or bow right away. She just looked at the piano for a moment, grateful that even in its imperfection, it had allowed her to speak her truth. Her mother in the back row stood, tears running down her face. She wasn't crying because of the applause. She was crying because she knew what it had taken to reach that moment. As Lena finally stood and bowed, the judges rose from their seats. One of them, a gray-haired man who had been silent through the competition, said softly into his microphone, "That was not just music. That was courage." Lena bowed again, her voice calm as she whispered, "Thank you." When she walked backstage, her heart was pounding, but not from fear anymore. It was from joy. She didn't know if she would win. She didn't even care. What mattered was that she had played through the storm and turned it into a song. Behind her, people were still talking. How she had managed to perform on a broken piano, how she had turned something wrong into something beautiful. The judges were whispering, writing notes, looking at each other with astonishment. Lena found a quiet corner and sat down. Her fingers were shaking and she could still feel the warmth of the keys. She thought about the nights she had played on cardboard, about the times she had wanted to give up. She smiled to herself. The piano wasn't ready, she thought, but I was. For the first time in a long while, she felt at peace, not because everything had gone right, but because she had finally learned how to stay steady when things went wrong. And out there in the hall, her performance was already becoming something people would talk about for a long time, not because it was perfect, but because it was real. When the competition ended that night, the hall buzzed with noise. People were still talking about the girl who played the broken piano as if nothing was wrong. Some called it bravery, others called it genius. The judges were whispering among themselves, and even the technicians had gathered near the stage, shaking their heads in disbelief. Lena didn't stay long to hear what was being said. After bowing for the last time, she quietly left the stage, holding her small music folder close to her chest. She could still hear the echo of the piano inside her mind, the slightly sharp notes, the string that snapped, the sound of her heartbeat mixed with the music. Her mother waited for her outside, standing near the entrance with a proud smile that she tried to hide behind a handkerchief. When Lena came closer, her mother hugged her tightly. "I didn't win yet," Lena said softly. Her mother shook her head. "You already did, my girl." They walked home through quiet streets, their footsteps slow and tired. The night air was cool and the stars looked clear against the dark sky. For a while they didn't talk. Lena kept replaying the performance in her mind, wondering if she could have done better. But then she thought of the faces in the audience, the way they had gone silent halfway through her piece, the way even the judges had leaned forward. There had been something in that silence. It wasn't pity. It was respect. That night, when she finally reached home, Lena placed her sheet music on the old wooden table near the window. Her house was small, one bedroom, one kitchen, and a tiny corner that she had turned into her music space. The same space where she had spent hundreds of nights practicing on that old keyboard that sometimes refused to turn on. She sat down in her chair and stared at her hands. Her fingertips were sore, The adrenaline from the performance had worn off, and all that was left was exhaustion. But underneath that there was something else, a quiet joy. Her mother came in with 2 cups of tea and placed one in front of her. "You remember," she said, "how you used to draw those piano keys on cardboard when you were small?" Lena smiled faintly. "I still remember the sound of that cardboard," she said. "It used to squeak when I pressed too hard." Her mother laughed softly, but there was pride in her eyes. "You didn't wait for things to be perfect," she said. "You just played anyway." Those words stayed with Lena long after she went to bed. In the days that followed, the competition videos began to appear online. Someone from the audience had recorded her entire performance on their phone. At first, only a few people watched it, but soon it started spreading. People shared it with captions like "The girl who turned a broken piano into art." Within a week, the video had thousands of views. Music students commented, saying they couldn't believe how she stayed calm when the strings snapped. Some professionals even broke down her performance in detail, explaining how she changed keys mid-piece to hide the tuning flaw. Others simply said it made them emotional. Lena didn't expect any of this. She didn't even know about the video until her teacher called her. "I've been getting calls all day," he said with excitement. "Your performance, it's everywhere. People are calling you the girl who saved the song." She laughed nervously. "I just did what I had to do," she replied. But deep inside, she felt something she hadn't felt in years: validation. Not fame, but understanding. For so long, she had been the quiet student, the one who couldn't afford a proper piano, the one others didn't take seriously. Now people were finally seeing what she could do. Still, she didn't let it change her routine. Every morning, she went to her part-time job at the small cafe near the bus station. It was a humble job, clearing tables, taking orders, serving tea and pastries. Most people there didn't even know she was a pianist. One afternoon, a customer walked in with a phone in his hand and a wide smile. "Hey," he said to the manager, pointing at Lena. "Isn't that the girl from the piano video?" The cafe fell silent for a second. Everyone turned to look at her. Lena froze, a little embarrassed. The manager grinned. "What video?" The man showed the clip, her playing the moment the string snapped, the way she continued without missing a beat. The sound of applause filled the cafe. Her coworkers were stunned. One of them whispered, "You never told us you played like that." Lena blushed. "It's just something I love," she said quietly. From that day, the cafe began to get new visitors. People who came not for the coffee, but to meet the girl from the video. Some asked her to play something for them, and once in a while, if the place wasn't too busy, she did. There was an old upright piano in the corner, slightly out of tune, but she didn't mind. In fact, she smiled when she first touched it. It reminded her of that night. The more she played, the more people listened. Even strangers who came in just for lunch stayed longer, sitting quietly as her fingers moved gently over the keys. She didn't play for attention. She played because it made her feel alive. One evening, as she was locking up, an elderly man approached her. He had been sitting near the door all afternoon, sipping tea and listening to her music. "You know," he said kindly, "I used to be a piano tuner. I can tell your instrument isn't perfect, Keen, but your heart is." She laughed softly. "I guess I've learned to live with imperfections." He nodded. "That's what makes your sound special. Real music comes from struggle, not from perfect keys." That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She lay awake thinking about how far she had come. She remembered the competitions she had lost before, the night she cried over mistakes no one else noticed, and the times she almost sold her keyboard to pay bills. Now, suddenly her story was inspiring others. Music schools were inviting her to speak about performing under pressure. Young students sent her messages, telling her how her courage gave them hope. But she never let the praise make her proud. Whenever someone called her talented, she always answered, "Talent is just practice in disguise." One weekend, the competition organizers called her back. They were hosting a small award ceremony and wanted her to perform again, this time on a fully tuned grand piano. When she arrived, the same judges were there, smiling warmly. The technician who had apologized to her the first time greeted her with a nod. "This piano is perfectly ready today," he said. She smiled back. "So am I." When she sat down to play, she took a deep breath, remembering the first night. The lights were just as bright, but her fear was gone. Her fingers touched the keys, and this time every note was clear. But even with perfect sound, she could still feel the heartbeat of that first broken piano in her memory. The audience watched in silence, moved not just by her music but by her story. They knew what she had been through. Every note she played carried that feeling of resilience, of finding beauty even when things go wrong. When the last note faded, the applause was thunderous. The judges stood again. One of them said, "It's easy to play a perfect piano, but very few can make a broken one sing." After the performance, as she left the hall, Lena stopped by the piano for one last look. She ran her fingers along the smooth edge of the keys and whispered softly to herself, "You taught me how to listen, not to sound, but to life." Her journey was only beginning. But now she understood something deeply, that true strength doesn't come from everything going right. It comes from learning how to make something beautiful even when things go wrong. And from that day on, no matter where she played, whether on a concert stage or an old cafe piano, people always said the same thing after hearing her, that her music felt alive, because it came from a soul that refused to give up. The morning sun spilled through the thin curtains of Lena's small apartment. The golden light landed on her old keyboard, the one that had been her silent companion through all her years of struggle. She had barely slept the night before. Messages, phone calls, and invitations kept pouring in since her performance at the award ceremony. It was strange, almost unreal. People she had never met were praising her, writing that her story had given them courage to face their own challenges. She scrolled through the messages with quiet disbelief. Some called her the girl who made the broken piano sing. Others said her playing had reminded them that life itself was an imperfect instrument. Lena didn't reply to most of them. She was grateful but also cautious. She didn't want attention to change her. Her mother entered the room with a cup of tea. "You're becoming quite famous," she said, smiling proudly. Lena laughed softly. "Famous? I still have to go to work at the cafe today." Her mother chuckled. "Even great musicians start somewhere small. Don't forget that," she nodded. The cafe was still her comfort zone, a place where the smell of freshly baked bread mixed with the quiet hum of the city outside. When she walked in that morning, her co-workers greeted her with playful applause. Someone had printed her photo from the performance and taped it to the notice board. "Look at our local celebrity," one of them teased. She smiled shyly. "I'm still the same person. Don't expect free coffee just because I play piano." They laughed, and soon everything went back to normal. Customers came in, orders were taken, cups clinked against saucers, and the old piano in the corner waited quietly, just as it always had. During the afternoon lull, when the cafe was half empty, a man in a gray suit entered. He looked around the room, scanning the faces until his eyes landed on her. He smiled politely and approached the counter. "You're Lena, right?" he asked. "Yes," she said, a bit unsure. He handed her a card. "I'm from the City Music Academy. I saw your performance online. The director would like to meet you." She froze, her heart skipping a beat. "The Academy?" he nodded. "We're offering you a scholarship for our advanced training program. Full coverage, instruments, lessons, everything." For a moment, she couldn't speak. Her whole life, that academy had been a dream she could never afford. It was where the city's most gifted musicians studied. "Are you sure?" she finally whispered. He smiled warmly. "Quite sure. You've earned it." When he left, she stood behind the counter in silence, trying to process what had just happened. Her coworkers gathered around, clapping and hugging her. But deep inside, she was overwhelmed. Excited, yes, but also afraid. That night at home, she told her mother everything. Her mother listened quietly, her eyes filling with tears. "This is your chance," she said. "Don't let fear stop you." "I'm not sure if I belong there," Lena admitted softly. "Everyone in that academy comes from big backgrounds, from families who can afford lessons since childhood." Her mother took her hand gently. "You belong wherever your heart takes you. Remember that." The next week, she visited the academy for the first time. The building was grand and filled with the sound of instruments echoing from different rooms: violins, flutes, cellos, and of course pianos. The air smelled of polished wood and quiet ambition. She was given a small tour and introduced to a few students. Most of them were polite but curious. They had heard about her story too, the girl who turned a broken piano into something beautiful. Some smiled kindly, others looked skeptical. In her first class, she felt like a beginner again. The teacher was strict, a man known for his precision. He made her repeat scales and arpeggios until her fingers ached. "You have emotion," he told her, "but technique must match it. Emotion without control is chaos. She nodded, trying not to take it as criticism. She understood what he meant. Every artist had to balance heart and discipline. Weeks passed. The lessons grew harder, the expectations higher. She practiced until her hands were sore, often staying late in the empty practice room after everyone had left. Sometimes she looked at the grand pianos lined neatly across the hall and remembered her old broken keyboard at home. The sound here was perfect, but strangely she missed the rough edges of imperfection. One evening, as she was finishing her practice, another student walked in. He was tall, quiet, and known in the academy for being one of the most talented pianists there. "You're the girl from the video," he said, sitting beside her. "Yes," she said softly. He smiled slightly. "I saw it. You play differently, not just with skill and with story." She looked at him curiously. "Is that good or bad?" He chuckled. "It's rare. Most of us play notes. You play feelings." They became friends after that. They practiced together, shared music, and challenged each other to improve. He came from a family of musicians trained since childhood, but he admired how she played from pure instinct, and she admired his precision and patience. They learned from each other in quiet harmony. Months passed quickly. Soon the Academy announced its annual concert, a grand performance where only a few students were chosen to play. It was the biggest event of the year, attended by critics, teachers, and sponsors. Lena didn't expect to be chosen. She still felt like she was catching up. But one morning, her name appeared on the list. She was to perform the closing piece and the final act of the evening. Her heart pounded when she saw it. That same day, her teacher called her to his office. "Do you know why you were chosen?" he asked. She shook her head. "Because you remind us why we play," he said. "Not for perfection, but for meaning." For weeks, she prepared for the concert. This time, she had a perfect piano, perfect conditions, perfect everything. Yet strangely, she missed the challenge. There was something about imperfection that had always made her feel more alive. On the night of the concert, she stood backstage in a flowing silver dress. The hall was packed, journalists, teachers, and musicians from across the city. Her name was announced. She stepped onto the stage, the lights warm on her face and the grand piano gleaming in front of her. She sat down, took a deep breath, and placed her fingers on the keys. The sound was flawless, every note clear, pure, balanced. The audience listened, mesmerized. But halfway through, something unexpected happened again. A sudden power flicker caused the lights to dim for a second, and one of the microphones near the piano gave a loud crackling sound. The audience gasped. For a moment, she froze, reminded of that night months ago when the piano itself had failed her. And just like before, she didn't panic. She kept playing, letting the brief interruption melt into the rhythm. She even changed the tempo slightly, using the silence that followed as part of her expression. By the time the power fully returned, the audience was completely drawn in. What could have been a distraction became a magical moment, another display of her calm and creativity. When she finished, the crowd stood up, clapping louder than ever before. Her teacher's eyes shone with pride. The head of the academy whispered to the person beside him, "She doesn't just play music, she becomes it." After the concert, reporters approached her, asking how she stayed calm through the disturbance. She smiled and said simply, "You can't control everything. Sometimes life tests you to see if you'll keep playing." That quote spread even faster than her first video. The next day, music blogs and magazines wrote about her performance, calling it the moment the room held its breath. But for Lena, the real victory wasn't in the applause or headlines. It was in knowing she hadn't changed. Whether the piano was broken or perfect, whether the hall was silent or loud, she was still the same girl who had learned to make music out of anything life gave her. When she returned home that night, her mother was waiting by the window just as always. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. Her eyes said everything, and as Lena looked at her old keyboard in the corner, she smiled. Because no matter how far she went, she would always remember where it began, with broken keys, cardboard cutouts, and a dream that refused to give up. The next few months after the concert felt like a dream. Everything changed for Lena. Invitations started coming from different places, schools, music events, small theaters, all wanting her to perform. Newspapers printed her picture, calling her the girl who played through the storm. But to her, she was still the same person who practiced late into the night in a small room with peeling paint and an old keyboard that sometimes made no sound. Fame wasn't something she chased. What she loved most was still the same, the quiet feeling she got when her fingers touched the keys and the world disappeared. But not everything that came with success was easy. With recognition came pressure. People expected perfection now. Every time she stepped on stage, she could feel the weight of eyes watching her, waiting for another miracle. One afternoon, while practicing at the academy, her teacher came in and watched quietly. After she finished a difficult piece, he said softly, "You're improving, but you're not breathing anymore." She looked up, puzzled. "What do you mean?" He smiled kindly. "You used to play like you were speaking your heart. Now you play like you're afraid to make a mistake." His words hit her deeply. He was right. She had become so afraid of disappointing people that she had lost a bit of the freedom that once made her music feel alive. That evening, she sat alone in the practice room, long after everyone else had gone. The hall was dark except for one small light above the piano. She stared at the keys, then slowly began to play, not for anyone, not for applause, but just for herself. The sound was uneven at first, hesitant, almost broken. But as she kept going, her hands loosened, her breathing softened, and she began to feel something again. The old warmth returned. It reminded her of the nights when she used to play silently on cardboard keys, dreaming of the day she'd touch a real piano. When she finally stopped, she realized she was smiling. She whispered to herself, "Maybe that's what music really is, remembering who you are." The next morning, a message arrived from the city's cultural department. They were organizing an outdoor concert in the park, an event for people who couldn't afford to attend theaters or fancy shows. They wanted her to be the closing performer. It wasn't a glamorous gig. There would be no crystal chandeliers or expensive pianos, just a temporary stage, a small crowd, and an old upright piano borrowed from a nearby community center. But the moment she read the invitation, she knew she had to do it. Her teacher raised an eyebrow when she told him, "You sure?" he asked. "That event won't give you any big spotlight." "I don't want the spotlight," she said. "I want to play for people who just love music." A week later, the day of the concert arrived. The park was buzzing with families, children running around, people sitting on blankets, and food stalls lined up on the sides. It wasn't a rich audience, but it was full of warmth. When Lena arrived, she walked straight to the piano. It was old, the wood chipped, a few keys slightly yellowed with age. She pressed one key and the sound came out soft but real. It reminded her of her first instrument. She smiled and said quietly to herself, "Perfect." The sun began to set, and the stage lights flickered on. The crowd gathered as she took her seat. She could hear children laughing in the background, birds settling in the trees, and the gentle sound of the breeze. It wasn't a grand concert hall, but it felt more human, more alive. When she started playing, everything grew still. Her music floated through the open air, blending with the evening sounds. People stopped talking, stopped eating, and just listened. Some closed their eyes. Others smiled without realizing it. There was something about her playing that touched even those who didn't understand classical music. It wasn't just skill, it was honesty. Her fingers spoke stories of struggle, patience, and hope. As she played her final piece, the wind carried the notes across the park. A child in the front row stared in awe, clutching his small plastic toy. When the last note faded, he clapped the loudest. Soon everyone joined in, laughter, whistles, cheers. After the performance, a woman approached her. She was carrying a little girl by the hand. "My daughter loved your music," she said shyly. "We can't afford lessons, but she's been teaching herself from YouTube. Would you maybe talk to her?" Lena knelt down to the girl's level and smiled. "Do you love the piano?" she asked. The girl nodded eagerly. "But we don't have one at home," she said softly. "I draw one on paper and practice like that." Lena's heart stopped for a second. It was like looking into her own past. She placed a hand gently on the girl's shoulder. "Keep doing that," she said. "One day you'll make real keys sing, I promise." After the event, Lena went home with her heart full. She couldn't stop thinking about that little girl. It reminded her of how far she had come, from cardboard keys to real stages. The next morning, she went to a small music store she often passed by but never entered. The owner recognized her immediately. You're that pianist, aren't you? The one from the academy. She smiled politely. Yes, I need your help. A few days later, she returned to the same park carrying a covered object. She found the woman and the little girl sitting on a bench feeding birds. When they saw her, their eyes widened. I brought something for you, Lena said, removing the cover. It was a small digital keyboard, and not new but in perfect working condition. The girl gasped. For me? Lena nodded. For you. I learned on something much worse. So if I could do it, you can too. The woman tried to speak but couldn't. Tears filled her eyes. She whispered, Thank you. That evening, as Lena walked home, she felt lighter than she had in months. For the first time, she understood what her teacher had meant, that music isn't about perfection or fame. It's about connection, about giving something from your soul to someone who needs it. Over the following weeks, more people began to reach out, not journalists or sponsors, but everyday people who had been inspired by her story. Some were students, some were parents, some were just dreamers who had almost given up. She read every message carefully, and one night she decided to start something small, free weekend music sessions in her community. The classes weren't fancy. They met in a borrowed classroom at a local school, with mismatched chairs and an old upright piano she rented cheaply. But slowly, more and more people began to come. Children, teenagers, even adults who had always wanted to learn but never had the chance. Each Saturday, she would sit with them, teaching not just technique, but patience, the kind of patience she had learned through years of struggle. Don't be afraid of mistakes, she would say. They're just part of your story. Her sessions became more than lessons. They became little gatherings of hope, a place where people laughed, played, and forgot their worries for a while. And every time she saw someone smile after playing their first full piece, she felt the same joy she had felt on that night when the broken piano had first tested her courage. She knew now that her journey wasn't about proving herself anymore. It was about helping others find their own song. That was the beauty of it all. The music never really ended when the performance stopped. It continued in hearts and memories in every person who heard her play and decided not to give up. When she looked back on her life, she realized something simple but powerful. The piano might not have been prepared that night, but maybe that was exactly what was meant to happen. Because it wasn't the perfect sound that changed her life. It was learning to find beauty in the imperfect moments. And now, she was helping others do the same. Lena's weekend classes started to grow faster than she ever imagined. At first, there were only a few children, shy and unsure of themselves. But soon word spread. Parents told other parents, neighbors told neighbors, and within weeks, her small classroom was full of laughter, music, and hope. She didn't charge anything. People offered to pay, but she always said, Music gave me everything when I had nothing, so this part will always stay free. The school's caretaker helped her set up the chairs every Saturday morning. Sometimes the piano would stick, sometimes a pedal wouldn't work, but she didn't mind. She had learned long ago that it wasn't the condition of the instrument that mattered. It was the heart behind the hands. One morning, as she was preparing for her class, she noticed a boy standing outside the door peeking in. He looked about 10 or 11, holding a worn-out backpack and staring quietly at the piano. She smiled and waved him in. Do you want to join? He shook his head quickly. No, I just wanted to listen, she asked gently. Have you played before? He hesitated, then nodded. A little. My grandfather used to have a piano, but it's gone now. She didn't push. She simply said, You can sit here and listen as much as you like. And if your fingers ever start itching to play again, the piano's waiting. Over the next few weeks, he kept coming back, always sitting quietly in the same corner. He watched everyone practice, his eyes following each movement. Sometimes he would close them, as if trying to remember what it felt like to play. One afternoon, when most of the students had gone, Lena looked at him and said, Come on. It's your turn. He froze. Me? She nodded. Yes, the piano misses you. He walked up slowly, nervous, and sat down. His hands trembled as he touched the keys. At first, the sound was uneven, but then something shifted. The melody started to flow, simple yet full of emotion. It was raw, but it was real. Lena listened, her heart swelling with pride. When he finished, he looked up shyly and said, It's not good, right? She smiled. It's beautiful. You played from your heart. That's the only thing that matters. From that day, he never missed a single class. He would arrive early, sometimes before Lena herself, eager to help clean the room or tune the piano. The others began to look up to him, and soon the classroom started to feel like a small family. It was during one of those weekends that a visitor walked in, a woman from the city's cultural board. She had heard about Lena's classes through a friend and wanted to see them for herself. She watched quietly as the children practiced. Some played simple songs, others struggled through scales, but every face was filled with focus and joy. After class, the woman approached Lena. "You've built something very special here," she said. "Would you consider performing again, this time with your students? There's a community concert next month. It could be a wonderful opportunity for them." Lena hesitated. It sounded exciting, but she also worried. Most of the children had never performed in front of a crowd. Some barely knew how to control their nerves. But then she looked at their faces, glowing with energy and dreams. Maybe this was exactly what they needed, a chance to believe in themselves. "All right," she said. "We'll do it." The next few weeks were filled with preparation. Every evening, Lena would stay after hours to help her students practice. They chose simple, heartfelt pieces, ones that told stories of kindness, patience, and courage. Sometimes they got frustrated. Sometimes they cried when they couldn't get a note right. But Lena always reminded them gently, "Remember that the audience won't hear your mistakes. They'll hear your courage." The little boy who once sat quietly in the corner became one of her most dedicated students. She gave him a short solo piece to perform. It wasn't easy, but she knew he could do it. The night before the concert, Lena couldn't sleep. She sat by her window looking at the city lights flickering in the distance. For a moment, she thought about how far she had come, from a girl with paper keys to a teacher guiding others toward their dreams. The next day, the community hall was buzzing. Families filled the seats, phones ready to record every moment. The stage wasn't grand, just a few spotlights and a row of chairs, but for Lena and her students, it felt like the world. Backstage, she could see the nervousness in their eyes. Some were fidgeting, others whispering small prayers under their breath. She gathered them in a small circle and said softly, "Do you know what's amazing about music? It doesn't care if we're rich or poor, young or old. When we play, we're all the same. So go out there and just share your story. Don't try to be perfect and just be real." Her words seemed to calm them. The performance began. One by one, her students took the stage. Some stumbled, some forgot parts, but the audience didn't seem to mind. They clapped after every song, cheering for every child like proud parents. When it was time for the boy's solo, Lena watched from the wings. He walked up to the piano, his small frame almost swallowed by the large instrument. His hands shook at first, but then he took a deep breath and began to play. The first few notes were shaky, but then his confidence grew. The melody filled the hall, simple, delicate, full of warmth. When he finished, there was a long moment of silence followed by thunderous applause. Lena felt tears prick her eyes. She wasn't crying because he played perfectly. She cried because he played bravely. After the concert, families surrounded her, thanking her for what she had done. Parents hugged their children with pride. The woman from the cultural board approached again and said, "You've given them something priceless. Would you be interested in turning this into a regular community program? We could help with funding." Lena smiled softly. "I'll think about it. But whatever happens, I want it to stay personal. I don't want music to become another system. It should stay human." That night, when everyone had left, Lena walked back onto the empty stage. The lights were dim now and the chairs were scattered. She sat down at the piano and played softly just for herself. Each note echoed through the empty hall, gentle and calm. She thought about the children's faces, their laughter, their courage. She realized that somewhere along the way, teaching had become her new kind of performance, one that didn't need applause to feel meaningful. She stopped playing and whispered into the quiet, "The piano wasn't prepared." But I was, and she smiled, because now she understood that being prepared wasn't about knowing everything or being perfect. It was about showing up, even when things didn't go as planned. The next week, her small classroom was full again. The children came running in, excited, carrying certificates and photos from the concert. The little boy proudly handed her a small drawing he had made, a piano surrounded by stars. At the bottom, he had written, "Thank you for teaching us how to dream." She held the drawing to her chest and said softly, No, thank you for reminding me why I started. Outside, the morning light poured through the windows, touching the old piano with a golden glow. The air was filled with chatter, laughter, and the sound of new beginnings. And as Lena looked around the room, at the children playing, the sound of clumsy notes mixing with pure joy, she realized that this was her true stage, not the grand concert halls, not the applause, but here, in this humble room full of dreams and imperfect music. Because in those imperfect moments, the most beautiful stories were born. Months passed, and Lena's little community music program continued to grow. Children from different neighborhoods, backgrounds, and ages came together every weekend. Some had never touched a piano before. Some were returning after years of losing hope. Lena didn't just teach them how to play notes. She taught them how to feel music, how to find their own rhythm, how to trust themselves even when things went wrong. One Saturday morning, as she arranged the room for class, she noticed a young girl standing outside the door. She held a small notebook in her hands and watched quietly. Lena smiled and gestured for her to come in. "Do you want to join?" Lena asked softly. The girl nodded but didn't speak. She had an air of shyness, the kind that seemed heavy with fear of failure. Lena knelt beside her and said gently, "Don't worry about anyone else. Just listen and see what you feel when you touch the keys." The girl hesitated but finally stepped forward. Lena guided her hands to the piano. The first notes were hesitant and uneven. Lena stayed beside her, whispering encouragements. "It's okay. Mistakes are just part of learning. Let the music follow your heart." By the end of the hour, the girl was smiling. The music she played wasn't perfect, but it had warmth, honesty, and courage. Lena knew that in her small way, she had helped this child discover something precious. Later that day, as Lena was cleaning up, she received a phone call from a local radio station. The host had seen her story online, the broken piano, the viral performance, the community classes, and wanted to feature her. Lena felt a familiar nervousness, but she agreed. The interview aired that evening. Lena spoke softly, honestly. She talked about her early struggles, about playing on cardboard keys, about the night the piano wasn't prepared, but she was. She spoke about the importance of showing up, of trying even when the outcome is uncertain. She didn't boast and she didn't exaggerate. She spoke like she always had, from the heart. After the broadcast, the response was immediate. Emails, messages, and calls came pouring in. People wanted to donate old instruments, volunteer in her classes, or simply thank her for inspiring them. Lena felt overwhelmed. She never thought her quiet little program could touch so many lives. A few weeks later, she received an invitation from the city council. They wanted to organize a large public concert featuring her and her students. This time, it wasn't a small park stage or a community hall. It was the city's biggest square with a real grand piano and a crowd expected to be in the thousands. Her students were thrilled. The young boy who had once quietly watched from the corner now stood proudly, practicing his solo with determination. The shy little girl from that morning was learning a simple duet with another student. Every child worked harder than ever, not for fame, but for the joy of sharing their music. Lena, meanwhile, felt a familiar mix of excitement and fear. She knew that thousands of eyes and ears would be on them and anything could go wrong. But she also knew that this was the point. This was why she had worked so hard to reach this stage. Not for applause, but to show these children that courage mattered more than perfection. The day of the concert arrived. The city square was alive with energy. Families, tourists, and music lovers gathering from all directions. The grand piano gleamed in the center of the stage. Lena walked with her students, holding hands with the youngest ones to calm their nerves. Backstage, she spoke softly to each of them. "Remember, mistakes don't matter. Feel the music. Let it tell your story." The first performers went on and the audience clapped politely. Then it was time for Lena's students. The boy stepped forward for his solo. His hands trembled, but he looked at Lena, who gave him a small nod. Then he began. The notes started quietly, uneven at first, but as he continued, his confidence grew. The crowd watched in silence, captivated. When he finished, the applause was loud and heartfelt. He beamed, proud of what he had accomplished. One by one, the other students performed. Some stumbled, some paused, but Lena had prepared them to embrace those moments. She watched them play with pride, seeing not just music but courage, determination, and self-belief. Finally, it was Lena's turn. She walked to the grand piano and sat down. The first note echoed across the square. The audience listened intently. The piano was perfect, but she didn't focus on that. She focused on the feeling, the story behind the music, and the journey that had brought her here. As she played, she thought of every struggle she had endured, the nights of practice on broken keyboards, the competitions, the moments of doubt, the children learning at her side. Every note she played carried a memory, a lesson, a heartbeat. Midway through her performance, a sudden gust of wind lifted her sheet music. It fluttered across the stage and landed behind the piano. For a brief second, she froze. But then she smiled. She remembered the night the piano wasn't prepared, when a broken string could have stopped her but didn't. She didn't need the sheets. She had the music in her heart. She continued playing from memory, letting every note flow naturally. The crowd was spellbound. Children in the front rows listened with wide eyes. Parents held their breath, and even the journalists watching scribbled in awe. When the final note rang out, the square erupted in applause. People cheered, clapped, and some even wiped away tears. Lena stood, taking a deep breath, feeling the gratitude and warmth of the crowd. She bowed not for herself, but for every child who had learned to play, for every person who had ever doubted themselves, for every obstacle that had become a stepping stone. After the concert, people came up to her. Some offered words of thanks, some shared their own stories of struggle, and some simply hugged her. One woman whispered, "You've reminded me that it's never too late to start again." That night, Lena returned home exhausted but happy. She looked at her old keyboard in the corner of her room. It had been with her through everything: silent nights, broken strings, and moments of doubt. She ran her fingers across the keys, smiling softly. Her mother sat beside her. "You've done something beautiful," she said quietly. "Not just with music, but with hearts," Lena nodded. "It wasn't just me. It was all of us, the children, the parents, everyone who believed in trying even when it's hard." She thought about the journey, from playing on cardboard keys, to the broken piano in the hall, to teaching children, to performing in the city square. Each step had been filled with challenges, doubts, and unexpected twists. But each step had also been filled with courage, growth, and the quiet strength of showing up. In the weeks that followed, Lena's story continued to spread. She was invited to talk at schools, cultural events, and community gatherings. She shared her experiences, not as a story of fame, but as a story of resilience. She reminded people that life would never be perfect, that plans might fail, that instruments might break, but what mattered most was being ready in the heart, being brave enough to try, and being willing to keep going. One rainy evening, she walked home from a late session at the community center. The streets were empty, the rain tapping softly on the pavement. She smiled to herself, thinking about how far she had come. She had learned that music wasn't about being flawless, about perfect conditions or applause. It was about connection, courage, and honesty. When she reached her apartment, she looked at the old keyboard again. She ran her hands across the worn keys, remembering the sound of broken strings, the quiet nights, the first moments of learning, and the lives she had touched. She whispered softly, "The piano wasn't prepared, but I was, and maybe that's all we ever really need, to be ready in our hearts no matter what comes our way." And with that, she played one final piece for herself. It was not for an audience, not for fame, not for recognition. It was for the journey, one for the struggles, the victories, the children, the memories, and the promise that no matter what obstacles life placed before her, she would always be ready. The notes flowed gently, imperfectly perfect, carrying the story of a girl who had once faced a broken piano and found music anyway. And in that moment, she understood something deeply and beautifully. Life, like music, would never be flawless, but it could always be meaningful. And so, Lena's story, and of courage, perseverance, and the power of showing up, became more than a tale of a girl and a piano. It became a story for everyone who had ever faced obstacles, self-doubt, or fear, reminding them that sometimes the world isn't ready. But you can be. Because being prepared isn't about perfect conditions. It's about believing in yourself when nothing else seems perfect. It's about playing the song in your heart no matter the challenges. And Lena, through all her struggles and triumphs, had learned how to do exactly that.